Data validation is basically a way that you can have drop down cells inside of a Google spreadsheet. So I have a Google Sheet open here in my browser, and I would like for these cells to be something that I don't necessarily have to type. I want to just be able to choose from a drop down. So there's different types of data validation that you can have. So I'm going to start with an hour. If I were creating a sheet, and this could look a lot of different ways, but let's say I wanted this to say like first, second, third, fourth, fifth hour. What I could do is I could go here to data and I could go to data validation. And then it will say, okay, do you want to do a list from a range, a list of items, a number, text, date, custom formula, or a checkbox? And for this one, you could just do a list of items because the hours are probably not going to change. So you just do a comma separated list and type them in here just like that. This could be like a yes, no, or I use the list of items for a finite number of things that I want to choose that is really not have any variation in it or change over time. So you can say that you want to show a warning if someone chooses like if someone typed in an 8 in that cell, it would show a warning, or you could actually have it reject the input completely. It just depends on the purpose of your sheet. And then you can also do some validation help text and put in some information here if you feel like that might be needed. So I'm going to say save. And now I've got this drop down here that shows my hours that could be selected. And I can click that cell and delete it as well. And then I could actually copy that down to other cells in my sheet as well. So for these other things, maybe I want this to also be a drop down, but instead of actually typing them in with commas, you can have data validation choose from a range. So I will oftentimes make a new sheet in the bottom of my Google Sheet called drop down options, and I'll just in each column throw in the things I want to be drop downs for what I'm doing. So in this example, if I want to choose from a list of students, I would go to my drop down options and maybe put all of those students in column A. Or the subject that they're in, I'd maybe come over here and put all of those in column B. It doesn't really matter if you have headers for this as much, so I don't really worry about it. But what I'm going to do is click on this cell, go to data, data validation, and this time I'm going to do a list from a range. And I need to enter a range or a formula. So I'm going to click this little icon here that looks like a window to select my data range. And then what I usually do is just actually click in the sheet and then click the column, and it'll automatically fill it in how it needs to be typed. So here I'm doing column A. Now, if you did have headers, you would just simply say that you want this to start on A2. But I don't have headers, so I'm going to do all of my column A and just say, okay, and then hit save. So now when I come back to my sheet, I have a drop down, and now it lists all of the students that were in column A of my drop down options here. What's great about this and why I prefer to do it this way is, let's say I've copied these cells down, and then like 2 days go by and I get a new student. I can just come in here and add something else to this list. So, okay, so now when I go to sheet, I can go click any of these drop downs and that other name automatically appears in all the drop downs and I don't have to recreate anything. So I love this, using this drop down option, choose from range, anytime I feel like I might have to add or change this data, because what's terrible is if you're trying to set this up and then like everything changes later, you don't want to recopy all your formulas down and mess up the data you already have in there. So for the subject, I'm going to click subject. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say I want to do data validation. I'm going to do a list from a range, click my cells, and click OK, and say save. So now these subjects are all in there, and I can copy these down, and this is good to go. You can even do a date validation. So I can do data validation instead of list from range or list at all. I can come down here and say I want this to be a date, and I want to choose a valid date, you can also set this equal to something, before something, on or before something, after a certain time, between two dates. So you can, it just helps a little bit control human error, right? So you can, I'm just going to say is validate for now. But if I hit save, what's nice now is when I click in this cell, if I double click it, I get a little calendar pop up that allows me to click and choose a date. So that's kind of nice. So those are how I like to do the data validations inside of a Google Sheet. This is an example of a spreadsheet I actually made my husband. He has his own home inspection business, and he will have clients call and want a bid for a home inspection. And he was like writing all this down on paper and trying to quickly calculate on a calculator how much it was going to cost to do their inspection. But he has to take some things into consideration. Like, he bases his prices off of the square foot of the home. He gives a discount for anyone who is in public education or public service, like police and firemen. And then people can also choose to get other services like termite or sewer lateral. And then if he does that, it's a third party, so he has to add fees for that. So I did this in a Google Sheet because I wanted it to look like a document, but I didn't want I wanted it to be a smart document. I wanted this to calculate this automatically for him. And so in here, there are formulas that are still working. And all I did to make it actually look pretty was I just did things like merging cells. So if you go to format, you can choose merge cells. So I would do merges to create like these wider cells when really there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns here, but it looks like it's one giant column because I merged them together. And I just changed the background color so it looks like a field you have to type in. The other thing I did was go to view, and I hid the grid lines. So if I pull those grid lines back up, you can actually see this looks a little bit more like a spreadsheet now. But if I go back to view and hide those, it just looks better. But also, look at this, time. There's those drop downs. So he would only offer these inspections because it takes him 3 hours to do an inspection at certain times. And so that way he could just type it in. Like, he didn't have to type it. He could just tap it and like on his iPad and fill it out really easily. And then these are little check boxes that do things. So if somebody wants a home inspection, that's based off the square foot of the home. So whatever number he types in here gets calculated in this cost. And so if somebody wants radon and they want a septic and a termite, those prices pop up and start adding in to these things. There's a lot of formulas in this sheet, but he can print this very easily or send it as a PDF, and it just looks like a one-pager document. And so that's kind of the advantage of creating things like drop downs and being able to use a Google Sheet to do that as opposed to like a Google Doc or something else. So that is drop downs in Google Sheets.